Welcome back to the Dojo. In our video today, what I'm going to be talking to you about is how you can effectively lead through change and uncertainty. So I'm going to be taking you through some tips around how you can make sure that you're taking your team with you, that you're navigating some of those choppy waters that inevitably come up in our businesses, how you can obviously take people from one state to a new state, whether it's restructuring your team, whatever the change is. What we're going to be talking about in this video is all about those key steps to bringing people on the journey with you. So the first tip that I've got for you is to make sure that you're communicating often and openly. The general rule is you cannot over communicate when it comes to managing change. I want you to be disciplined around thinking about who are my stakeholders, who do I need to be communicating with, and critically, what are the best forums through which I need to be communicating. So there's going to be a blend of one-to-one conversations, team conversations, whole group presentations, emails that are sent out and updated. What I will say to you is a lot of organisations invest a lot of time and energy in written communications that nobody ever reads. The most powerful thing you can do is to make sure you're engaging in conversations with people. The more you understand each individual in your team, the more likely you are to be able to influence their confidence or influence their buy-in, get them at least on the bus, giving things a go. There, unfortunately, isn't a one-size-fits-all strategy that's going to work for every single human. There are some common themes or common things we can think about that are consistent for most people. But what I will say to you is getting to know them, getting into that relationship where you're operating as their coach is going to be the most important thing you do. Now, if you are a leader of leaders or you're sitting in the HR department, you're trying to influence change, my advice to you is you will not successfully drive change unless every leader is actually taking ownership for it. So change is not something that can be outsourced to the HR team. Obviously, the HR team or teams dedicated to change management play an incredibly important role to support leaders, but leaders need to be the ones doing the communicating. So then further to that, my next tip is to make sure you're staying connected and that you're listening. So it's incredibly important that you're inviting questions. Often leaders through change or uncertain times are hesitant or fearful of questions because they're concerned about their ability to respond to the question. So one of the keys again around effective communication is to be as transparent and open as we can be about what is changing and why it's changing. So again, the more we can stay connected to people and truly listen to how are they feeling, so what are those concerns, what are the ideas they have, etc. The more we're actively engaging in that way, again, the more likely we are to take people with us. So some of those questions might be tricky. Sometimes the answer is, I really don't know yet. You can't always have all of the answers by nature. This is an uncertain time or a changing time and not everything is predictable. Again, be upfront with people about that when you can't tell them, but then be very upfront when you can tell them honest, real insights to what likely lies ahead. One of the big mistakes I see organisations making is they get super fearful that if they're open with everyone around what lays ahead, that people are going to immediately start looking for a new job and we're going to have massive staff turnover and everything's going to be a disaster. But I actually find the opposite is true, that when there's a void of information and leaders are being super closed about what's going on, they're playing their cards very close to their chest, that makes people more nervous, makes them more suspicious, it makes them trust less. It's more likely to inspire them to actually secure their future now and just go get a new job. Whereas I've seen many teams work with businesses, for example, when a business has been acquired and team members are not going to have a job in the new combined entity. And I've seen those people still work really hard and support the change journey because they felt treated with respect, because they trust the organisation to give them the insight so they can start to take care of their own futures at the appropriate point. Don't fall into that trap of wanting to keep everything a secret. You're more likely to inspire, again, that disengagement and that concern. So my next tip for you is to make sure that you are role modeling the mindsets and behaviors that you want from everybody else. So key ones here for leaders is to make sure that you are modeling both being in a calm headspace and resilience. Again, one of the things that will rapidly undermine a confidence of a group and get everyone feeling really nervous or defensive or defending their own territories, whatever it might be, is if they see leaders doing the same. So if you are in a heightened emotional state, you're super anxious about the change and you're showing everybody that that's the case, then obviously that undermines their confidence in turn. So the more you as a leader can show that, okay, we might be in a tough time, it is important to be real with people. People don't typically buy into the everything's fine, everything's going to be great. And we just kind of promote the dream, sell the dream of how great this is going to be. If we're not being realistic about how hard it's going to be on the way through as well, then people think you're delusional. They think you just don't get it as a leader. It's about being both optimistic about what lies ahead and why this is worth it, and sharing with people that, yeah, you know, there might be some times where we're all having to work hard or we're having to learn new skills or things just don't feel as innate to us anymore because everything's been moved around, and that's uncomfortable and it's inconvenient and it takes energy. But it's worth it. So again, if you're calm even when things go wrong, and you're resilient even when change is taking a long time to get there, when you keep reinforcing with everybody that real view of, yes, this is a journey we're on, but we can make it, again, people are entirely more likely to follow your leadership. My next tip is to make sure that you recognize the emotional impacts on people. So this is where, you know, great change leaders have a strong capacity for empathy. Now, that doesn't mean you pander to everyone's emotion and you don't drive change because people don't like it. You know, you don't have to change the plan to at the same time empathize with people about how they're feeling. So just because you don't feel a particular emotion doesn't mean it's not valid and real for somebody else who is. So common, obviously, reactions around change and uncertainty is people will become resistant to change. So they might, again, want to stay the way things are because it feels safer. They may not be consciously thinking that. They might go, oh, I'm just going to resist this change so we can keep things the way I like them. But that might be happening anyway on an unconscious level. You know, people might, again, become defensive or get upset when certain suggestions are made. Classic example I see is when teams are trying to actually improve what they do and they're re-engineering their processes, and somebody in the team's super resistant to this. And it's not until you start to talk to that person, you start to recognize that actually their ego's been dented a bit here because they are the inventor or the creator of the previous way of working, and now we've all come along and said, oh, this isn't good enough anymore, and we're kind of pulling it apart, and there hasn't been sensitivity around that. So this person might actually be feeling just a little bit miffed and just need a bit of love and a bit of validation and reinforcement that, you know, they're still valuable, they're critical to the period ahead. You know, with that person, helping them to see that, you know, because you've been the master of the way we've done this before, you're essential to be able to help us to understand how we can do it into the future, so we can take the good from what we've worked with previously into the future. Again, as an example, there are lots of different reasons why people are resisting or reacting or behaving in the ways that they are. And empathy is an incredibly important starting point to be able to lean in with curiosity to understand what's going on for this person and what coaching conversation can I have with them to bring them on the journey. Again, there's unlikely to be one conversation where voila, suddenly the person no longer feels any of the fear that there have been or any of the emotions that there have been. But reflect for yourself on how much it can dissipate heightened emotion when somebody just simply says, I care and I get it and understand. Again, you might not still get your own way, but at least somebody understands you. My next tip is to make sure that you are visible and you're approachable. For most leaders who are driving change or dealing with uncertain times, it requires that you yourself are head down, bum up, you're working hard, you're often in trenches, you're trying to drive things through. But it's critical that people can feel like that they can reach out, they can come have the conversation when they need to. They need to see you driving the change. They need to see you understanding their reality accessibility and connecting and working in partnership with the rest of the team. If you're not accessible and they don't know where you are and what you're thinking and you're constantly in meetings, then again, they're not going to feel that sense of strong leadership from you. And then my next bit of advice is to make sure you actually empower other people. What I mean by that is get people involved in decisions, give them a voice, help them to contribute in ways that influence your thinking or the decisions that are ultimately made. People are entirely more likely, again, to support something that they've had a say in. Again, when we're driving change, clearly we're not looking for consensus. We're not looking to run a team vote to get everybody to agree. But most reasonable human beings, if they genuinely feel like you've given them a voice, you've allowed them to share their views, you've genuinely taken on board and given it consideration, even if you then make a different decision to the one that they would prefer, they're still more likely to accept the decision because there's been genuine consideration of their perspective. Now, obviously, there are humans in the world that if they don't get their own way, they're grumpy regardless, right? So let's not pretend they don't exist. Of course they do, but I'm talking about the majority of people. Again, feel heard. You've given consideration to my perspective. At the end of the day, you're the leader. If you need to make a different call, then that's your call. That's how most reasonable humans, in my experience, behave when they've been allowed to contribute. My next bit of advice is to make sure you are pacing the change. So change moving too quickly or too slowly is two of the most common challenges I see. Sometimes we're trying to do the right thing and we communicate in advance. We say, hey guys, this change is coming. And then the team hear nothing for 6 months. So by the time we actually get to the change, people are already heightened. They're anxious. They've made up a whole bunch of stories in their heads because that's reality. When we actually don't give people insight and guidance, they'll just make stuff up. They'll gossip and they'll guess and they'll suspect and there'll be a whole story in their head before we've even got there. Moving things forward, at least so people can see some visible progress matters. But at the same time, not sprinting down the path of change at a pace that the organisation doesn't have the capacity to deliver on. So, we need to be real about what bandwidth people have to rethink processes, learn new skills, implement new ways of working. Again, whatever the change is, it needs to be paced at a rate that, again, doesn't take forever, doesn't leave people in these dark caves for months on end, but at the same time is doable. Again, the team can feel confident is good leadership on your part. That okay, it's hard, it's ambitious, we're striving, we get all that, but at the same time, it is ultimately doable. And then my final piece of advice for this particular video is to keep reinforcing the why. Why are we changing? Because one of the things you'll face is change fatigue, where people will run out of steam for it. And they'll just get to a point where it's like, oh, is this ever going to happen? So just recently, I've been working with an organisation who are wholesale changing their entire systems. And part of the challenge that they've had is the whole business has been aware that the change is coming, but they have spent the last number of months in a phase of the change that hasn't yet actually impacted the rest of the business because the technology team, the change team are still in the trenches of actually working with the vendor to work out exactly how the systems are going to work, etc. There is already a degree of change fatigue in this business and they haven't truly started to implement the change yet. Again, what was important in that scenario was to make it very clear in people's minds that we are actually still in the R&D phase of this and to give them greater visibility of when the implementation phase is likely to happen. And in that particular organisation's case, what we've actually recommended is to communicate less with the rest of the business because they were getting weekly updates that didn't actually feel like anything was happening. Again, I just share that because what they've also had to do and what is typically important is to keep reminding people, why are we doing what we are doing? So when the slog gets a bit hard, when it gets a bit long in the tooth in terms of are we still going through this change, that people have something valuable to anchor their focus to. So much we could talk about when it comes to change, but hopefully you've got at least a few strategies out of what I've shared with you today to help you to get better and better at it over time.